Just wait a moment, make sure we're streaming. Looks good. Okay, very good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karava Vahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvisha vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Good. Welcome to you all. Welcome also to many viewers who are watching either live or you're watching the recording of this satsang. As always, we'll alternate between our online viewers and local students. It turns out we have many more online viewers, and we have lots of questions. Okay, and I'm just looking at getting questions in real time here. They keep blinking in here. All right. Okay, we'll start here. Okay, we're ready? We're ready, good. Oh, let me apologize in advance that if you've emailed me a question, we may or may not get to it. There are many more questions than we're able to get to in a given session. First question comes from Vishaka, who lives in Virginia. She says, Vedanta is based on three pillars of Shruti, Yukti, and Anubhava. Shruti, scripture, Yukti, reasoning, and Anubhava, experience. Everything has to be consistent with all three. For a teaching to be accepted in Advaita Vedanta, for a statement to be accepted in Advaita Vedanta, it must be, first of all, have scriptural basis, it must be reasonable, meaning irrefutable, and it must be conformable to experience, consistent with experience. So Vishka's question is, I often mention that experiences can be misleading. Indeed, they are misleading. So how can an experience be a pillar if it's not always right? The point is, no one of the three can form the basis for Advaita Vedanta. It's not based on scripture alone. Something that's based on scripture alone and that ignores reason and experience are more like faith-based religions, which doesn't describe Advaita Vedanta at all. Something that's based on yukti alone and ignores scripture and ignores experience is philosophy, right? That's what philosophy is. A lot of Buddhism, by the way, falls into that category. And that which is based on anubhava alone, experience, and ignores reason and ignores scripture, is like, I don't know, modern materialism, eat, drink, and be merry kind of attitude. So anubhava is accepted, but it's always tested by if there is an experience, that experience will not be considered without testing it logically and without testing it against the scriptures. If an experience, for example, suppose somebody experiences going to heaven and meeting Lord Shiva. Fine, you can have that experience. Is the experience consistent with scripture? And is the experience consistent with reason? And the answer to both of those questions is probably not. So therefore, such an experience won't be accepted. Next question from Prashanto in Bangladesh. I'll paraphrase here. As I know, watching your videos for thousands of hours, my gosh, I don't know if I have thousands of hours of, anyway, it means a lot, that's good. everything we experience takes place in the three states, and it's all a product of our mind, and that's the point of it. And now his question. Therefore, even when we see God or have a vision of God, I mentioned going to heaven and seeing Lord Shiva, it's in the mind, the play of the mind, and it's not our ultimate nature. It's an experience. Experiences are transient. It's not absolutely real. Now, whatever form we worship as God could be a mere creation of our mind. Certainly whoever goes to heaven and has a chat with Lord Shiva, probably a creation of their mind. But now it leads to the question, so do we worship the God created by the image in our own mind? Are we merely worshiping our concept of God, an image of God? Absolutely not. Remember that the mind is an instrument, antakarana, and an instrument is that which you can use to see or hear or connect to something else. So we use the mind, we use our concept of God in the mind to connect us to Ishvara, whoever and wherever that Ishvara might be. Metaphor you may have heard me use is that of a telephone. A telephone is an instrument. When you use a telephone, are you talking to the telephone? You get the point? So telephone is an instrument, mind is an instrument. Antakarana means inner instrument. You use that, right now, I'm using that instrument to communicate with you. Good. You're using that instrument to communicate, to understand what I'm saying. Excellent. Tell me, am I talking to people who are a figment of my imagination? Are you listening to a Swami who is a figment of your imagination? No. What's present in your mind is what it is, but your mind connects us to a greater reality. Whatever happens in your mind is not absolutely real, but the mind as an instrument connects us to a greater reality. So the Ishvara you pray to is the real Ishvara, even though your concept of Ishvara could be limited, faulty. Next question. Madhusudana Saraswati. This is from Arun, who lives in Bangalore. Madhusudana Saraswati was a great proponent of Advaita Vedanta in Shankara's tradition, well known for his scholarly works on Advaita. We also know that he was a great devotee of Sri Krishna. How do his views on bhakti compare with that of Adi Shankara? We could go through lots and lots of their texts and start to analyze it as a scholar would. I don't think our interest here, and I don't think Arun's interest is in real scholarship like that. What we can say is that the views of Madhusudana are not going to be very different from the views of Shankara, since he's in the same lineage. So I would say that Madhusudana's views on bhakti will be largely in keeping with what Sri Shankara taught. What I would say, on the other hand, is emphasis will vary quite a bit. So Madhusudana was put emphasis on things that Shankara didn't emphasize as much. And it's true that Madhusudana emphasized bhakti more in his teachings. In fact, one of his texts, Bhakti Rasayana, the medicine of bhakti, nice title, is a text written by Madhusudana. There's no text by Shankara specifically teaching bhakti. Yes, I know there are so many stotras and hymns They're probably not authored by Adi Shankara, so I don't think that's, we need to discuss that further. But here's an example of a text authored by Madhusudana on bhakti. But emphasis is not just, Madhusudana emphasized not only bhakti more, he also writes extensively on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. In his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, I think, in his commentary on chapter 6, Dhyana Yoga, meditation, I think he gets into a long discussion. I read it long ago, on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Shankara never discussed Yoga Sutras in any extent. So we could say that amongst these various teachers, you'll find amongst teachers in Shankaracharya's lineage, you'll find differences in emphasis. I don't think you'll find any great difference in view. In Sanskrit, what we call siddhanta, bottom line teaching. Okay, do we have any questions here in the hall? Otherwise, we'll come back here. Nothing right now. Okay, and we'll take some more questions here. We have lots. We'll come back and check in with you in the future. Next question from Bennett. Could you turn that fan on, please? Low. Thank you. This is from Bennett, who lives in Melbourne. My question is, why is the religion conversion rate so high among Hindus? It happened in the past, and it's still the same to some extent. Is it because we moved away from the Vedas and are attracted to Puranas more? Nothing related to that. Religious conversion, we have to be more specific. Religious conversion is a huge topic. If you ask why in India those northeast provinces, the Arunachala Pradesh and this Mizoram, is that pronounced correctly? I don't know much about these places. They're up I think geographically they're above Bangladesh, right? And many of you know that some of those places are mostly Christian now. Mostly Christian. And Hindus are a minority in their own country of India. And if you say, why did that happen? The answer is pretty obvious, and that is that the Christians made a very deliberate effort to go and proselytize in that area. And the methods of proselytization they use are often lifestyle related. So in other words, by giving people education, by giving them food, by helping to uplift the quality of their lives, a very poor area. You'll find that proselytization is always more effective in poor areas and much less effective. And so let those Christian missionaries go to Bangalore or Chennai and see how successful they are, and they won't be very successful. So anyway, so they use economic incentives as part of it. I'm not saying that I don't mean to accuse them of anything malicious. They're not malicious in nature, but it is what it is. So they use economic incentives to convert these people to Christianity. So we have to, when we talk about religious conversions, we have to talk about things very specifically. So this happens, of course, not just in the Northeast, but throughout India, generally in poorer communities where Christians make a big effort by sending missionaries, we see conversion. Where there is wealth or where there are no missionaries, we see very little conversion, extremely little conversion. So, another very different example would be conversion of Hindus outside of India. So Hindu expatriates, especially children of Hindu immigrants. This happens, for example, in America, in US. This is a very common thing where a Hindu family will come, raise their children here, and sometimes the children will convert, especially if a grown child marries a Christian. I won't say it's common yet, but it happens. Or if occasionally, if there's a marriage between a Hindu and Muslim, even in India, occasionally. So similarly, for the second generation of Hindus living in this country, it happens. Not really common, but it happens. What about third and fourth generation? Who knows? It's kind of up to us, in the sense that the stronger the Hindu community is in this country, the less likely we are to see those kinds of conversion. On the other hand, the weaker the Hindu community becomes in this country, then the more likely it is for those kinds of conversion. I'm not sure if that answers Bennett's question or not, but that's what I have to share. This question is from Martin, who lives in Montreal. He asks, I understand that atma cannot be perceived or known, and anatma can be perceived or known. So, body is anatma, the consciousness within, atma. Body can be perceived, known, share anything outside anatma, but that which is inside cannot be perceived. And his question then is, but what is the difference between anatma and the early Buddhist concept of anatma? And tricky, when we use words, they mean different things in different contexts. So when we use the word anatma, we talk about it in a loose sense, it means everything else in the world, everything separate from your true self, from consciousness. So it includes everything you perceive, the entire world, including your body and mind. Anything that is known or knowable is anatma. But the Buddhist tradition used anatma to describe a doctrine. So there is, in fact, in the Pali language, it's called anatta. Anatta, or anatta, I think, is the equivalent word in Pali. It means no self, but there it meant a doctrine, not a thing. So they had a doctrine that Buddha did not teach that there was such a thing as atma. His absence of teaching that there was no such thing as atma in the Hindu sense, therefore his teachings were called anatta, or anatta, or anatma, to use a Sanskrit word, as a doctrine of no self, the doctrine of no self. But to make things a little bit more complex, it turns out that Buddha never taught that atma exists, nor did he ever explicitly say it doesn't exist. So it wasn't, in American English, it wasn't a big deal for him. It wasn't an issue. He was more concerned with he was really focused on solving the problem of suffering, and a little less inclined to worry about all these philosophical issues. But later followers of Buddha were very interested and concerned about all these philosophical issues. So there were all kinds of doctrines then that emerged later after Buddha, most of which completely deny the existence of Atma, some of which in much later Buddhism, there are two main schools, Shunyavada. These two main schools of what's called let me not get into it. There are a lot of details of Buddhism, and I don't think it'll benefit us much. So later Buddhists will have lots of discussions about anatma, but it simply means a doctrine of no self, because Buddha never taught that atma exists. Why did Buddha not teach that atma existed? Because Buddha rejected the authority of the Vedas, and it is the rishis whose teachings were recorded in the Vedas that through which we understand what is atma. Okay. Then, next question. That was from, where am I here? That was Martin in Montreal. Next question from Om Prakash. Why do we always feel like we are sick when the body gets sick? My brother is suffering from COVID. I'm sorry, I hope he recovers well. Everyone in the family has suffered from COVID. This is Om Prakash, who lives in Texas. This is such a good example. In fact, this is one of the things that Buddha himself addressed really, really directly as to the ancient rishis. And that is, suffering is the direct result of false identification. It's so obvious. The moment you say, I am this, whatever problems are in the body are your problems. But how absurd that is. This body is a thing, anatma, as we just said. This chair is a thing. I give this silly example. If the arm of this chair is broken, fix it. It's not a problem. If this arm is broken, fix it. It's not a problem. But we make a problem out of it. Oh, my arm is broken, or oh, this, or oh, that. There is so much identification with the body and the mind, so that whatever goes wrong in the body or mind is a big deal, to refer to my earlier statement. Suppose you're really attached to a chair. Suppose in your home there is an heirloom chair. It is 200 years old, carefully restored by you spent 2,000, people do this, they collect antiques. So you spent $2,000 on this chair. And your cousin comes to visit. Your cousin weighs 320 pounds. Sits in the chair and it's finished. You get upset. Why? You're identified with the chair. Notice if he sits in one of these cheap plastic chairs that people like to have, and he goes, you don't care about the chair. Are you okay? Right? Well, are you okay? But when he breaks your $2,000 chair, do you ask, are you okay? You're more concerned about the $2,000 chair. This is a problem of identification. The chair is just a chair. If it gets broke, fix it. The arm is just an arm. If it gets broke, fix it. This kind of pragmatic attitude is possible through the teachings of Vedanta when you gradually break free from the intense and thorough identification with the body and mind. And because this identification is so tenacious, it takes a while. So be patient and Stay with these teachings over a period of time. The day will come when this arm is broken of the chair, fix it. This arm gets broken, fix it. It's just my guru made the difference between a problem and a situation. A situation is just a fact that you respond to in a pragmatic way. Problem is very different. We turn things into problems. Broken chair arm is a fact. Broken fleshy arm is a fact. But we turn one or the other or both into a problem. That's on us. It's not due to the chair, it's not due to the body. It's on us, so to speak. Okay, next question. Sajit lives in Dubai. A large expatriate Hindu community there. Sajit writes, who actually attains moksha? Is it sukshma sharira, which is born again in another gross body? Okay, who attains moksha? Actually, in a manner of speaking, this one gets a different kind of moksha. When it's burned to ashes, you don't have to feed it anymore. Your time of taking care of this one, and how much effort. We spend every day, you brush the teeth and comb the hair. I don't think so. But whatever you do, put on this and that and the other thing, put on clothes. So you gain moksha from all those responsibilities when this one is burnt. I'm being facetious. Okay. But now what about the subtle body? Does the subtle body gain moksha? The subtle body is a subtle thing. This is a non-subtle, this is a physical thing. Physical things don't get moksha. Subtle body is another kind of thing, but instead of being made of physical elements, it's made of non-physical elements, subtle elements, mind and senses and so forth. So things don't get moksha. Moksha is for a conscious being. When you say, I suffer, that one needs moksha. Moksha being freedom from suffering. But now there's a subtle but important point here, and that is, we've discussed in many classes and also in many satsangs, that consciousness is unchanging. Consciousness, which is your essential nature, is unchanging. If consciousness is unchanging, how can it gain moksha? Since moksha is a change of state from bondage, bandha, to liberation, mukti. Since atma, consciousness is unchanging, consciousness can't gain moksha, which is no problem because consciousness doesn't have bondage in the first place. That, in fact, Shankara is famous for a statement. He says again and again that Atma is nitya mukta, eternally free. Atma never got into a state of bondage. In fact, there's a relationship to the biblical concept that mankind fell from grace. You know the biblical story of Adam and Eve. They were with God in paradise, in some kind of heavenly domain. They committed sin, and they got kicked out, so to speak, kicked out of heaven. They fell from grace. They descended to an earthly plane in which they suffer. That story may make sense to Christians and Jews and Muslims, doesn't make any sense at all from a Vedantic standpoint, because this fall from grace is a change of state. Means you have to change. You were free in heaven, now you are in a state of bondage on earth. That thinking cannot be applied to unchanging consciousness. Consciousness is held to be an absolute universal principle, and as such, from a philosophical standpoint, it's incapable of undergoing any change of state. Anyway, this is a huge topic that is discussed extensively in Advaita Vedanta. But now we have the final question. So the body is a thing, doesn't gain moksha. The subtle body is a subtle thing, doesn't gain moksha. Consciousness is not a thing, but it also doesn't gain moksha because it's unchanging. So then who gains moksha? And Shankara gives a one-word answer for that. I think it's in his Bhagavad Gita, not in Bhagavad, in some commentary, forget where. His one-word answer is, who gains moksha? Prashtu. Actually, the question was, for whom is ignorance? But it ends up being pretty much the same. The problem belongs to whom. His one-word answer is prashtuhu, for the one who asks the question. There's a lot of wisdom in that. Who asks a question? Does your mouth ask a question? Part of the physical body? No. Does your brain and mind, leave brain apart. Does your mind ask a question? Your mind is a thing. Things don't ask questions. Does consciousness ask a question? Problem, consciousness doesn't have a mouth, nor does it have thoughts. Unchanging. Again, somebody asks the question. Who? That's an interesting question. The interesting question is, who asks questions? It's not the physical body, it's not the subtle mind, it's not consciousness, but rather, and it's a trick question because it's a conglomerate. In particular, mind in the presence of consciousness gives rise to a sense of being an individual being, jiva. Right now, your mind is in the presence of consciousness, and it is the co-presence of consciousness and mind that allows you, as an you in quotation marks, as an individual being, you with whatever name you have. You know, so here, Tadatmananda exists as an individual because of the combination of consciousness and mind. Of course, look at the analysis. Here we go with some Vedanta. Tadatmananda is which? Is it consciousness or the mind? Well, neither. Who is Tadatmananda? Tadatmananda was a name given by my guru in 1993 to a fellow who came out of the Ganges River dripping wet and naked. The rituals we undergo. And so that name was given kind of arbitrarily. How did you get your name? Your parents just made it up, right? Does your name describe you in any essential way whatsoever? They made it up. Your parents could have used a different word. They could have called you George. They could have called you Clunk. But they chose better, thank goodness. They chose better than that, but you get my point. That is, your name is completely arbitrary. Because it belongs to a being who's similarly completely arbitrary. The individual person. We won't go there, but let me just hint at it. The individual person we call jiva is a product of ignorance. Doesn't really exist. You create that sense of individuality, when mind and consciousness come together, you give it a name, not George. You generally, whatever name your parents gave, you use that same. Some people change their names, fine. Whatever name, you label that individual with an arbitrary name, and then you say, who gets moksha? The one who's asking that question is that individual being that emerges in the simultaneous presence of consciousness and mind. We use the word jiva to describe that one. Jiva is not consciousness. Jiva is not subtle body. By the way, jiva in Hindi and in vernacular languages, jiva can be used for subtle body, but in Advaita Vedanta, we don't. Jiva refers specifically in Advaita Vedanta to this fictional, arbitrary character that's invented. I'm being very deliberate with these words. That's invented when consciousness and mind are brought together in the condition of ignorance. Anyway, by the way, the technical part of that is huge. We won't go into it in detail. That's Sajit's question. But by the way, I'll come back to you. So get a question ready. I'll come back in just a moment. One more question here from Jayant, who lives in Raipur. Jayant asks, since Ishvara is the karma phaladata, the giver of the fruits of our actions, is it possible to bribe Ishvara by any means so that we get exactly what we desire? I'll make a bad joke about Raipur. So if you happen to know the Raipur, Rajasthan? Is it? I think so. Chhattisgarh? Okay, thank you. So suppose the chief minister of Chhattisgarh is your cousin. And so whatever you want, you can maybe get it done through your cousin, who might live in Raipur or elsewhere in Chhattisgarh. Ishvara is not like your cousin who has a governmental post. Ishvara is not. Such a common confusion. Why do we consistently treat Ishvara like a rich and powerful family member? I don't get that. Rich, powerful. Rich, powerful. He's in charge. In fact, Ishvara, the root meaning of Ishvara means the one who's in charge. So he's in charge of everything, and sometimes you can bribe the one who's in charge, except that we're not talking about a human being. We've got to stop superimposing human traits on Ishvara. Philosophers have this huge word that they use to describe this. Anthropomorphizing. Too many syllables. Anthropomorphize means to give the morphosis form. To give the form, to superimpose the morphos, the form of anthropos, of human beings. Ishvara is not a human being, but we do this all the time. And not just with Ishvara, just to make this really apparent, we do this as a matter of fact. When if you have a pet cat and the cat rubs up against you very nicely, the cat loves me. Love is a human emotion. Cats don't have human emotions. I don't want to get into the discussion if they have emotions at all. I don't know. I don't want to argue about it. But one thing we know is they don't have human emotions. So why is a cat doing that? Most of you know that the cat has scent glands in its skin and is rubbing its scent upon you to mark you as part of its territory. That's a fact. But what do you say? Oh, anthropomorphizing, you are superimposing human traits on the cat. The cat is not a human being. The dog is not a human being. Your car, some people do this to their cars, or computers. You know, your computer is not being stubborn. Stubbornness is a human trait. And by the way, you already know this, 99% of the time, the problem isn't the computer anyway, it's the computer operator. But we are so accustomed to superimposing human traits on Ishvara, and arguably, that's one of the biggest obstacles to understanding who and what Ishvara truly is. Until and unless you drop these childish notions, how can you really come to know Ishvara as Ishvara truly is? So it's a huge, huge problem. Maybe your cousin who has a governmental position, maybe that person can be bribed, not Ishvara, not a human being. Okay, we have some questions here. You'll need the microphone.
I think you answered it. When we were talking about the moksha, it came to my mind. Are you saying that jivatma merges into paramatma?
No. So I didn't use either of those terms, jivatma and paramatma. So let's start by defining those terms. Is moksha the merging of jivatma and paramatma? First, we define the terms. Paramatma is all-pervasive consciousness. Jivatma is consciousness in association with your individual mind. Consciousness, I want to say this again, this is crucial. Jivatma, consciousness with regard to your mind. Paramatma, consciousness with regard to all minds. And the question is, does jivatma merge into paramatma? And here's the problem. In order to merge, they have to be separate at first. And in jivatma is already the same as paramatma. It's a matter of perspective. The Vedantic example we use all the time to describe the relationship between jivatma and paramatma. By the way, we're not talking about clay this time. Usually I hold this up and I ask you, what is this? And you say pot. I say, no, wrong, it's clay. But that's not that's not the use of this example today. Today we want to talk about pot space. Pot space represents jivatma. The space in this room represents paramatma. And then you can say, well, we can describe moksha as so when you burn the body, so here we break the pot violently, and the space inside this pot merges with the space in the room. Really? Not really. The space in this pot is already identical with the space in this room, but there is an experience of separation. Even right now, in your experience, you see pot space as being separate from the room. Well, that's your interpretation of the experience. Suppose we analyze that experience, and we say, well, where does pot space end and room space begin? Is it on the inner wall of the clay or on the outer wall? Or is it exactly in the middle? Or is it at some other point? Kind of arbitrary, right? Completely arbitrary. And the reason, of course, is, does space ever have an edge? Space has no edge, has no dimensions, has no form. So formless, dimensionless, all-pervasive space cannot be chopped up, so to speak, into a pot space. You see, you look at the consequences of it. The consequence is your consciousness, equivalent to the pot space, jivatma, is already identical to paramatma, all-pervasive consciousness. What is the problem? Here you have an experience of limitation. You could, from this experience of the limited pot space, you could make a correct conclusion or an incorrect conclusion. The incorrect conclusion is space got chopped up into this little bit. The correct conclusion is that space is all pervasive, watch this, and this pot is moving in space. Is space moving? Or is pot moving? Wow. Look at the implications of this. If you make the wrong conclusion, that this is a little bit of space chopped up, then you have to conclude Swami is moving space around. How about that? But it's not possible. Space doesn't move. Pot moves. Your consciousness is not stuck inside your head. It's not uniquely associated with your body and mind. You think it is. That's the wrong interpretation. So you have, based on an experience, you can make a wrong conclusion or a right conclusion. Based on the experience of this finite body and mind, you can make a wrong conclusion. And that is, I am the consciousness associated with this particular body and mind. That's a wrong conclusion based on your experience. Along comes Advaita Vedanta, says, you've made the wrong conclusion. And that is, you are consciousness, but independent of this body and mind. Why make this false relationship between consciousness and this particular body and mind? Please tell me, how is space related to this pot? It's a trick question. It's not related to the pot. There's no connection whatsoever. If I break the pot, what happens to space? If I move the pot, what happens to space? If this pot ages, what happens to space? You get the point? There's no connection whatsoever. So then why do we make this false connection between consciousness and this body and mind? Well, we make that wrong conclusion because of ignorance. We don't know. And the function of Vedanta then is to remove that particular ignorance. Removing that ignorance results in what? Does it result in what merges when you gain moksha? As I said at the outset, you can only merge if you're separate to begin with. There is no merging whatsoever. This Vedantic teaching leads you to discover that what you call my consciousness is not yours. It is all-pervasive, vast, unchanging consciousness. And when you get it, things will be quite different. Does that work for you?
Yes.
Okay. Other questions here? No? Okay, we have a few more here. Next question from, that was a good question, by the way, nice. From Amit, who lives in India. You have mentioned that Brahman is absolute reality on which humans depend, including Ishvara. Everything depends on Brahman for its existence, the physical world, living beings, and even Ishvara. Just as the existence, your existence depends on Brahman, even Ishvara's existence depends on Brahman. Just like now we're back to the other example. This is not the same pot I held up before. This one is a clay one. So, in this example, this pot exists because of clay. In the same way, the universe exists because of Brahman. You and I exist because of Brahman. Even Ishvara exists because of Brahman, as this pot exists because of clay. So, that being said, does that mean that Ishvara, even though Ishvara is a higher reality than Brahman, that Ishvara, like humans, can merge into Brahman at some point? Here's our merging again. We'll come to that problem. Or is Ishvara a powerful energy source without any form that will remain until eternity? We've got some wrong assumptions going on here. Ishvara is not a powerful energy source. Humans don't merge. These are common things that we pick up, we get. We just discussed merging. So there is no merging. Yes, I know this concept of merging is used a lot in the literature. We can say, of course, that your body, when it's consumed in ashes, merges with elements. Doesn't merge with Brahman. It merges with the physical world. If you want to call that a merging, that's fine. But he says merging with Brahman. We just discussed that, so we won't go further. So, everything exists because of Brahman, but there's a difference between Ishvara and everything else that exists. Everything else that exists was created. There was a point in time when it came into existence. According to modern science, we talk about the Big Bang. Everything that we know began its existence some 14 billion years ago. So everything that exists was created and continues to undergo change. Everything, but not Ishvara. Ishvara was not created. The uncreated creator, the unmoved mover, to use some words from Western philosophy. And to understand Ishvara as being uncreated may take a little Vedanta to understand that. You also have to understand the doctrine of karma. But to answer Amit's question more briefly, that which is uncreated doesn't merge, doesn't disappear, doesn't change. The universe comes and goes, Ishvara remains. The Ishvara is present in a manifest form, Ishvara remains. The universe becomes unmanifest at the end of time, Ishvara remains. Okay. Okay. Then, another question. This one is from Sanjay, who lives in Mumbai. My question is, who is in ignorance? Thank you, Mia. Check. Please check on her. Who is in ignorance of his or her natural state? And this person who has to be freed from ignorance. We just discussed that. Who asks the question? Who gets moksha? I do not think that there is any subjective consciousness or a lower consciousness, as consciousness that's not subject to change. There can't be any lower or higher consciousness. Correct. As we discussed before, consciousness does not have ignorance, does not have consciousness doesn't suffer, consciousness doesn't have ignorance, consciousness doesn't have any problems, consciousness doesn't need Advaita Vedanta, nor does your body and mind. Who needs Vedanta? Who needs, and when I say who needs Vedanta, we'll rephrase it, who needs freedom from suffering? And that leads us very directly to the answer. Whoever says, I suffer, needs Vedanta. And who says, as we went through before, the body doesn't say I suffer, mind doesn't say I suffer, consciousness doesn't say I suffer. It is that co-presence of mind and consciousness. Ignorance has a locus, however. And the locus of ignorance, where does ignorance hang out, so to speak? Ignorance hangs out in your mind. Ignorance belongs to your mind, and the ignorance in your mind is removed by knowledge which takes place in your mind and solving the problem. And what happens to consciousness when you become enlightened? Nothing. What happens to consciousness when you die? Nothing. What happens to consciousness when you get a headache? Nothing. Okay, you get it. All right, a couple more and we'll conclude. Uday from Pune. As per Vedanta, Sukshma Sharira is jada. Jada means inert, not a conscious being. Your mind seems sentient because of its presence, because of the presence of consciousness. And here I'll remind you of the ancient worldview about the mind and the subtle body in general, which is to say that just as your physical body is made of physical elements, your subtle body, including your mind, are made of subtle elements. This is part of the pre-scientific worldview. That's why he says Sukshma Sharira is jada. It's made of stuff, subtle stuff. Being worldly objects, including Sukshma Sharira, they fall into a lower level of reality compared to consciousness. Okay? My question is, what is it, here's the question. What is it in the Sukshma Sharira that allows consciousness to produce life force even though it is jada? We got a problem with terminology here. First of all, let's separate out two issues. One is living thing, and the other is sentient thing. Things can be alive without being sentient means being able to see, hear, relate to the environment, be able to have experience. So that you can have something living that is not sentient like a human being. Like an amoeba is a living thing. What does the amoeba experience? I don't think we would attribute experience to an amoeba. There's no nervous system, no brain, nothing really like that. No sense organs, so nothing to give rise to what we understand as experience. So an amoeba is alive, but has no experience. The life of an amoeba is due to what? Is the life of an amoeba due to the presence of consciousness? We've already said consciousness is all pervasive. Therefore, consciousness is in the amoeba. Does that make the amoeba alive? Does the life force of an amoeba depend on consciousness? No. So in ancient worldview, they call it prana, life force. So the amoeba has prana. In modern science, we talked about this a couple of sessions ago. 200 or 250 years ago, Western science actually thought there was such a thing as called life force, elan vital. And they said it exists, and it comes and gets inside of different objects, and it makes those objects alive. They dismissed that entirely when they realized that in a test tube they could create living things. So there is no... In our ancient worldview, we had a subtle, non-physical thing called prana, and the science has this dismissed idea of something called elan vital, this life force. The amoeba is alive due to laws of nature. Whether you accept prana as being part of the laws of nature or not, it doesn't make any difference. Due to the laws of nature, the amoeba is alive. Due to the laws of nature, the amoeba is alive but has no experience. No, you are also alive. In fact, an amoeba is one cell. How many cells are you made of? They actually have a number for that. I don't remember some 50 billion, some unimaginable number. But you are made of a finite number of cells living together as a colony. Seriously, this is biology. You meaning your body. Your body is a complex colony of different kinds of cells. And then biologists like to differentiate. There are this kind of cell and that kind of cell, and they have different kinds of cells. You are a colony of all these different cells. Each of these cells are alive, and none of those cells can have an individual experience. You, as a conglomerate with a mind, you have an experience. Where does that experience come from? None of the cells in your body have experience, but this conglomerate has experience. Part of that conglomerate, of course, are the cells in your brain. Something special goes on in that brain. First of all, let me give you the ancient worldview. The ancient worldview is, as Uday correctly says, sukshma sharira is jada. Part of that sukshma sharira is mind. Your mind is a thing made of non-physical stuff. Your mind is a non-physical thing. Something is unique about that non-physical thing called mind. First of all, does the amoeba have a mind? Well, even modern science will tell us that you can only have a human mind where you have a human brain. The amoeba obviously doesn't have a human brain, so it has no human mind. So the amoeba doesn't have a mind. You and I have minds, and that mind, this is the ancient worldview, has a unique property. And what is that unique property? When that mind, not when, because that mind is in the presence of consciousness, there's some unique quality of that mind to reflect consciousness. The metaphor that's given is that of a mirror. Can any object reflect light like a mirror reflects light? This is an object, and in fact it reflects light. Can you see your image? You won't see your image because it doesn't reflect like a mirror. There's something unique about a mirrored surface that allows it to reflect in a way that other objects don't reflect. This object reflects light, but not like a mirror. There's a unique quality of the mirror. In the same way, there is a unique quality of the mind. And the unique quality of the mind is to metaphorically reflect consciousness, to make that consciousness manifest, to form thoughts made of consciousness. This is actually a very technical thing. I don't want to get too deep into this because we're going to wrap up this satsang right now. Obviously, this is an ancient worldview. How to translate that into a modern worldview? Tricky, because modern worldview can't yet explain even what is mind. They can't explain. But all we know for sure is there's something special about your brain. Fine, if you say, if a scientist says, I don't believe in the sukshma sharira nonsense, subtle, non-physical things, of course, I'd ask that scientist who says, I don't accept the existence of non-physical things, I'd ask the scientist, have you ever felt happy or sad? Yeah? How much do the happy and sadness weigh? Are they physical things? Anyway, they're just to poke at the scientist a little bit. The point here is setting aside this ancient worldview and staying with a modern worldview. There's something unique about your brain. And scientists haven't figured it out. They're not likely to figure it out, at least not in their current direction. There's something unique that allows for the reflection or manifestation of consciousness. Absent an amoeba, present due to your brain. Something unique. It's that capability to reflect or manifest consciousness. And this would be a good place to conclude our satsang. We'll end with a prayer. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinaha sarve santu niramayaha sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritangamaya. Om Shanti 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 Om. That's it. See you next time.